The pod shuddered as it pierced the upper atmosphere, and the alien woman pressed her palms to the translucent canopy, watching Earth unfold below like a slowly unwrapping gift of chaos. The cities gleamed with artificial light, rivers traced silver threads through continents, and oceans winked in patterns that made no sense to anyone who had not memorized planetary coordinates for destruction. She inhaled the recycled air of the pod and exhaled a plume of controlled patience, reminding herself that every second counted. Her ears twitched reflexively, long and delicate, sensing the faint electromagnetic hum of satellites above the planet. The mission was simple: observe, strategize, obliterate. Nothing emotional, nothing messy, nothing that could interfere with a clean operation. But for the first time, a flicker of curiosity crept into her consciousness, and she blamed it on the chaotic, blinking lights of a city that seemed to insist on being unpredictable. The landing was intended to be quiet, surgical, precise. She had studied human infrastructure, their patterns of defense, and the inefficiency of their bureaucracies, all in preparation for her task. Yet as the pod touched down on the outskirts of a military base, she tripped over an unmapped ditch, sending her perfectly balanced control panel tumbling into the mud. A sputtering alarm sounded inside her pod, and for a heartbeat, she considered whether to recalibrate her sense of dignity or simply laugh. She chose laughter, a short, alien hiccup of sound that would have terrified anyone with a normal human imagination. Except, as it turned out, humans were exceptionally bad at noticing alien distress unless it involved coffee stains. The base itself was a chaotic theater. Soldiers scurried in patterned confusion, drones hummed over their heads in lazy arcs, and a large robotic assistant attempted to balance a tray of data pads while spinning in what appeared to be a very earnest interpretation of a pirouette. She observed all this with the precision of an archivist and the amusement of a visitor in a human-themed amusement park. One soldier, in particular, caught her attention. He was short, slightly hunched, and possessed a determined frown that refused to settle no matter how many ridiculous directives he issued to his malfunctioning tech. He dropped his datapad twice in the span of 3 minutes, muttering about intergalactic tax audits, and swiping at the tray-spinning robot with a hand that might have been better used for an actual weapon. By the time she exited her pod, the soldier, Lieutenant Caleb Marr, had looked up at the sky, squinting at her descending figure with a mixture of awe and suspicion. She had intended her first words to be commanding, authoritative, a single sentence to announce her dominion over this planet's minor defenses. Instead, she coughed politely into her sleeve, startling herself with the strange, human reflex, and Caleb simply raised one eyebrow. "That's new," he said, and the corners of his mouth twitched as if he wanted to smile but was unsure whether protocol allowed it. Her first interactions with humans were a series of misfires. She tried to introduce herself in a form that would seem impressive, adopting a posture of absolute control and subtly flexing her ear sensors, but she tripped over a cable that snaked across the tarmac. Caleb, watching her tumble with silent amusement, extended a hand that she ignored out of principle. "You're, confident," he said. "I like that, or maybe that's gravity being mean, hard to tell." She considered shooting him a look of withering authority, then realized that he had already moved on to argue with a drone about why it insisted on labeling her pod alien trash. She paused, struck by the absurdity, and a single, unintended chuckle escaped her throat. As the day progressed, she observed the human way of operating, and it was nothing like her calculated training. They were messy, unpredictable, and profoundly charming in their incompetence. A vehicle designed to transport supplies rolled backwards slowly because a rookie soldier had pressed the wrong button, and instead of panic, the humans shouted at each other in a language she could barely parse but found vaguely entertaining. Caleb, her accidental point of focus, found a stick, tapped the vehicle's sensor, and muttered something about magnetic fields needing a cup of coffee. She blinked. Is that a joke? She asked herself, and the concept, humor, fluttered in her chest in an unfamiliar, unsettling way. By nightfall, she had set up a temporary observation station in a storage shed filled with human supplies, many of which were entirely unnecessary but colorfully packaged. Caleb wandered in at some point, carrying a box of rations, looking faintly horrified at the alien figure crouched among crates of canned food. "You do know how to use a microwave, right?" he asked. She tilted her head, long ears sweeping like antennae, and considered explaining advanced thermal manipulation. Instead, she attempted to mimic the human method, pressing a button and nearly igniting the entire stack of rations. Caleb's sigh was a mixture of exasperation and humor. "I'm going to need to start a support group for aliens who think microwaves are a form of art." She frowned, not understanding the joke fully, yet something warm flickered in her chest. Later, as the stars came alive overhead, she transmitted a preliminary report to her fleet. In the message, she detailed the human capacity for chaos, inefficiency, and unexpected laughter, noting each as both a tactical hazard and a variable she could not account for. Her superior's response was terse: complete annihilation, with no allowance for amusement or curiosity. She considered replying with a detailed explanation of why humans were hilariously unpredictable, but instead, she watched Caleb, who had finally sat down on a crate beside her, staring up at the stars as if they were the most interesting thing in the universe. He said quietly, "You know, they never teach you how to watch stars with someone who isn't from your planet. It's easier with company." Her response was instinctive. She adjusted her posture, let her ears flick once, and said nothing, but the notion lodged in her mind like a tiny, persistent comet. Obliteration of Earth was simple in theory, she reminded herself, yet the presence of this human, with his humor, his mistakes, and his inexplicable patience, complicated matters in ways she was only beginning to understand. As the night deepened and the hum of distant drones carried over the base, she realized that her mission had become a question she could not answer with weapons, data, or cold calculation. Somehow she found herself leaning toward a concept entirely alien to her species: curiosity about a human, and the faint, strange hope that maybe, just maybe, some missions were better delayed. And in that moment, as the earth below twinkled with reckless, ridiculous life, she almost laughed again, catching herself on purpose, and Caleb looked over, eyebrows raised. "You're starting to get the hang of it," he said. She merely tilted her head, ears twitching, and considered that perhaps annihilation could wait. The next morning began with a symphony of clattering boots, whining drones, and the occasional exasperated curse that bounced off the hangar walls like errant electrons. She watched from her concealed vantage point as humans began their day with characteristic chaos, and Caleb Marr moved through it all with a mixture of competence and comic resignation. He balanced a coffee mug in one hand, a tablet in the other, and somehow managed not to trip over a robot vacuum that had somehow gotten entangled with a cargo crate. She tilted her head, the long tips of her ears brushing against the edges of her hood, and considered reporting this to her superiors as a warning. Humans were unpredictably efficient in their inefficiency. By mid-morning, she decided observation was no longer sufficient. She needed direct interaction. The first attempt, naturally, was a disaster. She stepped into the mess hall intending to appear confident and commanding, but instead slipped on a spilled tray of synthetic protein shakes, her arms flailing like a poorly calibrated anti-gravity test. Caleb, ever the reluctant observer of human and alien chaos, simply caught her by the elbow. "I didn't know aliens could glide like that, should I put it in the manual?" he said dryly, giving her the kind of smirk that humans called wry. She frowned, uncertain whether he mocked her or admired her balance. Their first real conversation began over breakfast, which she approached with a scientific curiosity bordering on obsession. Humans consumed strange, sticky substances for energy, and Caleb explained each item as if lecturing a sentient AI. "This is oatmeal. Think of it as earth porridge, but it attempts to contain chaos in a bowl. Sometimes it fails spectacularly," he said. She studied the steaming porridge, noting its molecular inconsistency and wondering why anyone would voluntarily ingest it. When she tried a spoonful, it dribbled down the front of her uniform in defiance of gravity, and Caleb laughed. "See, even the food has a sense of humor here." She blinked, momentarily considering whether to catalog the human diet as a hazard. The morning progressed with an exercise in logistics that neither she nor Caleb could have predicted. A convoy of supply drones had gone rogue, forming an impromptu parade across the base. She observed the situation analytically, intending to intervene with precision, but Caleb waved her off. "Relax, they'll either crash or join the dance. Humans tend to survive both outcomes." She allowed herself a small, amused flick of her ears. The drones zigzagged dangerously, narrowly missing each other, while the humans scurried underneath like bemused ants. She noted that despite the apparent disorder, no one panicked beyond what she considered normal human hysteria. By afternoon, she found herself drawn into the mundane human rituals that Caleb had mastered through years of practice. He taught her how to operate the base's power generator, which involved more guesswork than engineering, and explained why humans enjoyed arguing over the correct sequence of switches even when it did nothing meaningful. She listened, ears twitching at each nonsensical rule, and accidentally energized a set of lights in a staccato rhythm that resembled some kind of alien Morse code. Caleb stared at the flickering array, then shrugged. Congratulations. You've just invented disco power. Humanity thanks you. She considered whether this was a compliment or a subtle insult, then decided that humans were far too perplexing to analyze with cold logic. Later, during a tactical simulation exercise, she witnessed Caleb in action. He moved with cautious efficiency, issuing orders to holographic units with a humor-laced pragmatism that confounded her understanding of human combat psychology. One of his subordinates asked for clarification on a command, and he replied, "If we win, I'll take all credit. If we lose, blame the coffee." She blinked, uncertain whether this was strategy, comedy, or a threat. The holograms flickered, a representation of a planetary invasion scenario that she found ironically quaint, and she realized that humans thrived on improvisation in ways her species considered inefficient and reckless. That night, she accompanied Caleb on a patrol outside the base. The moonlight reflected off her long ears, casting subtle prisms that shifted in color with every twitch. They encountered a rogue drone, aggressive but unarmed, and she prepared to neutralize it with a precise laser pulse. Caleb, however, approached it with a long stick and a series of verbal threats that seemed entirely nonsensical but inexplicably worked. The drone skidded backward, then whirred off into the darkness, apparently cowed by his confidence, or perhaps his absurdity. She stared at him, astonished, and he gave a sheepish grin. Sometimes intimidation is more about style than tech. Amid these daily misadventures, her own internal conflict grew. Each encounter with Caleb chipped away at her original detachment. She found herself laughing at his sarcastic commentary, feeling irritation when he complained about mundane inconveniences, and most alarmingly, anticipating his presence with a flutter she had no protocol for. Humor, which she had once catalogued as a human anomaly, now infiltrated her thoughts. She caught herself imagining conversations with him when alone, practicing witty comebacks that she had never needed in her previous life. A turning point arrived when Caleb introduced her to a civilian project, a makeshift observatory constructed from salvaged satellites and transparent polymer domes. Humans had built it to study the stars, mapping constellations in ways that were scientifically crude but emotionally rich. He invited her to peer through the lens at a distant nebula, and she did so, adjusting her long ears to optimize focus. The colors were chaotic, unaligned with her species' precise spectrometry, yet mesmerizing. Caleb nudged her gently. "See, even the universe has a sense of humor. It throws colors around just to mess with your optics." She tilted her head, the tips of her ears brushing his shoulder, and for the first time, allowed herself to simply feel rather than analyze. The chapter wound down with them sitting on a rooftop, observing the city lights and listening to the low hum of drones. Caleb pointed to a blinking satellite. "Bet that little guy's on a coffee break too," he joked. She considered correcting him, explaining orbital mechanics and energy constraints, but instead she laughed softly. The sound surprised her as much as it did him. He turned, eyebrows raised. "You're humanizing, that's dangerous." She flicked her ears in acknowledgement, her thoughts already twisting with an emotion she could not name. By the end of the second day, the alien woman understood that her mission had changed, not because of a technical failure or strategy or enemy interference, but because of one human who combined resilience, absurdity, and kindness in a way that defied calculation. Humor had become a weapon she had not anticipated, curiosity a chain, and empathy a variable beyond her programming. In the quiet of the night, as the hum of distant satellites mingled with the laughter echoing from the base, she realized that she was no longer simply an observer. She was a participant in a story whose ending she could not yet predict. and that uncertainty was thrilling in a way that obliteration never could be. The morning was a chaos of humming engines, blinking consoles, and a particularly loud debate over whether a drone carrying a shipment of synthetic cereal bars should take a shorter, scenic route around the base. She observed from the edge of the operations deck, ears twitching, the tips catching stray holographic light like tiny prisms, and wondered how any species could function in such deliberate disorder. Caleb Marr approached, holding a datapad that seemed to vibrate with both energy and frustration. "The fleet is on the move," he said, deadpan, "and apparently they think Earth is now a breakfast menu item. You might want to, I don't know, phone home." She followed him to a tactical console, fingers hovering over the controls. For the first time, she hesitated, her mind replaying every interaction with this human who had so thoroughly infiltrated her thoughts. Her mission had once been simple: eliminate the planet, nothing more, nothing less. Now she considered delaying orbital strikes, rerouting destructive drones, and even absurdly, negotiating with humans about what constituted acceptable planetary behavior. The thought made her smirk, ears flicking in a subtle alien shrug. "Negotiation?" she asked, trying the word in her mind as if tasting it. Caleb tilted his head. "It's like diplomacy but with less paperwork and more sarcasm." Their first test came in the form of a rogue orbital cannon accidentally targeting the wrong coordinates. She leapt into action, calculating precise deflection trajectories while Caleb improvised with a magnetic disruptor and a large rubber mallet he insisted was for emergencies. They laughed at the ridiculousness of it, and the cannon shifted harmlessly into orbit, harmlessly firing at a cluster of drifting space debris that tumbled like confetti across the vacuum. "See?" Caleb said proudly. "Destruction averted with style." She shook her head, ears twitching in bemusement, and admitted silently that she was beginning to enjoy the improvisation. Meanwhile, her fleet began contacting her directly, demanding obedience. She tapped a sequence into the communicator, her voice modulating with cold precision. "Fleet, the target planet is under review. Estimated threat assessment, highly comical, awaiting further instructions." The response was brief, angry, and entirely unamused. She considered replying with a detailed description of Caleb's breakfast mishaps and his uncanny ability to defuse drones using interpretive dance, but decided against it. Instead, she rerouted the fleet, giving herself time to think, observe, and most unexpectedly, feel. Caleb, sensing her internal hesitation, teased her mercilessly. "You know, most aliens don't get their first planetary attachment before breakfast. It's impressive, really." She shot him a glare, ears flicking in irritation, though her heart, or whatever alien approximation of it she possessed, fluttered unpredictably. He continued, undeterred, "Next time, though, try the coffee first. Makes tactical decisions slightly less horrifying." Their partnership evolved rapidly as the day progressed. She taught him alien communication protocols, demonstrating how subtle changes in ear curvature conveyed complex emotions, while he introduced her to human humor, from slapstick mishaps to puns so bad they were almost weaponized. She tried to mimic a human joke, delivering a line about rogue AI and planetary etiquette, and Caleb laughed so hard that a small robot nearly toppled over in fright. She frowned, ears twitching, uncertain whether she had succeeded or committed a social crime. The true climax arrived when an unexpected alarm signaled that the alien fleet had begun automated destruction sequences, ignoring her delays. Rockets ignited in the upper atmosphere, the sound muted but the vibrations echoing through the base. She and Caleb raced to intercept, combining alien technology with human improvisation in a spectacle of chaos and collaboration. He climbed atop a control console, waving his hands like an absurd conductor while she redirected energy fields to contain the blasts. "I feel like we're making cosmic pancakes," he shouted. She blinked, ears flicking in disbelief, then allowed herself a laugh that echoed over the control deck. In the quiet aftermath, the fleet finally halted, awaiting her command. She faced the console, fingertip poised over the final override sequence that could either obliterate the planet or preserve it. She inhaled deeply, remembering the first moments she had set foot on Earth, the clumsy humans, the spilled coffee, the absurd dances of drones, and Caleb's patient, sarcastic guidance through every disaster. Her thoughts drifted to the observatory they had visited, to the stars and nebulae she had once measured with clinical precision and now saw with wonder. She realized that the mission had never been about destruction alone. It had been about connection, understanding, and the unpredictable variables humans introduced into any equation. With a flick of her wrist, she redirected the fleet, halting all aggressive sequences and sending a message that shocked even the bravest commanders. Planet preserved, Lieutenant Caleb Marr authorized as liaison. Her ears twitched in a subtle, satisfied pattern as she looked at him. He stared, eyebrows raised, before giving a grin that suggested he had long suspected she would choose something absurdly humane. The rest of the day was a mixture of debriefings, technical adjustments, and unplanned celebrations. Caleb and she moved through the base, sharing stories of alien and human misadventures, sometimes laughing, sometimes rolling their eyes at the inefficiency of both species. They reprogrammed drones for peaceful exploration, recalibrated satellites for accurate communication, and even arranged a small, semi-official human-alien comedy demonstration in the hangar that became a minor sensation. Humor, it seemed, had become a universal language. By evening, they stood together atop the rooftop once more, watching the now quiet city beneath them. Caleb nudged a small satellite into a gentle orbit with a handheld gravimetric device inside. You know, some days I can't believe we survived, and other days I can't believe we didn't destroy everything by accident. She tilted her head, ears brushing his shoulder. You have a strange way of defining survival, she said, and for once she allowed herself to embrace the strangeness. The alien woman who had come to annihilate a planet had changed. The cold, precise agent of destruction had been replaced by someone capable of laughter, curiosity, and connection. She had learned that power without understanding was hollow, that humor could diffuse more tension than any weapon, and that one human could make the difference between annihilation and preservation.